Start here momentarily. We are recording. Cool. Well, thank you guys all for coming. Really appreciate getting to hear what everybody's doing and who they are and where they're from. Actually, John Thompson is to blame for why this is even occurring because he brought this up and I also had an interest in it. Just my background for everybody's purview is I'm in operations for an electrical engineering design and manufacturing company. So I actually run physical projects, not digital. But I was really interested in what Agile and hybrid can help me do in terms of budgeting and forecasting and having that and facilitating that discussion with customers in that. And again, going through this with John Halberstadt, and it's cursory because I'm new to it in a lot of ways. And it's going to make it's just kind of a broad scope of some of our discussions and ideas that we've gone over while discussing it and things that I've learned or kind of shared across them. So let's go on screen here into our agenda. So we're going to cover a broad overview of what budgeting and forecasting in agile and hybrid environments looks like. Discuss a couple of key challenges in that space. We're going to talk about two approaches. We'll really dig into one of them with the template. I did hear from Tina before, thank you for signing on early, that there was some issues with the link sent. Pinned in the top of the chat is another link that you can download to follow along, or again, we are recording and you can approach that again, like Fred, I know can't because he's at work and his work computer won't let him download from suspicious people like me. So if you have time at another point, you can get to this and we'll review it. It'll be on our YouTube page, which has a link in our chapter website. After that, we have some tools and metrics we'll discuss for analysis on this. Again, we tried to show some of that with this Excel sheet, but if you have a different medium for that is more advantageous to you or you know better than Excel, then please use the tools that you know how. And then we'll see if we have some time for Q&A. But I think we'll cover this pretty quick and have some fun with it as best we can. So why we're using Agile Hybrid? And again, my perception of this coming from a waterfall background was that you're seeking out that flexibility of an agile project. You're looking for that way of facilitating that discussion, in kind of setting up the environment for both you and your customer to be having those clear terms and everything, right? Is kind of what's being sold on it, right? I think when I talked with John about it, in waterfall, there's kind of that assumption put in place for you're going to throw the dart down the thing and you're going to hit the bullseye. And in reality, and what Agile tries to cover is that that's not going to happen because we're humans, right? We're going to be making mistakes. And so it acknowledges the need for iteration and hitting that point. And then for me, and what I'm actually looking at doing is coming from waterfall, is to build more of a hybrid, right? Where you hit those milestones, you stack the iterative process around these milestones, like a traditional waterfall thing, and you have sections that you're acknowledging are going to be iterative, right? And in talking about this with John, what we noticed really was that there's I think commonality among the two, but the example challenge is right when you have changes that impact your scope and your cost, and it's really, what we're hoping to kind of see is that that you get more forecasting on when that's happening, and so that you can facilitate that discussion, right? As a project manager, that's what you're trying to accomplish. The continuous reason, right, and then again. The challenges you're trying to hit is, as you have you may not have a stable team, right? And you may need to pull new members in order to get the job done. So, as you adjust resources on those things, you might need to, do that during, sprints and change up, per sprint.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, at least from my experience in the real world, and it's gotten better, but it's still kind of messy, right, is that even as many teams have moved towards agile ways of working, whatever flavor you like, scale it or don't scale it. But especially many enterprises, it's and this is, I think, where Agile gets kind of a bad rap, and understandably so. It's kind of like, well, why don't you just understand us? Like we do stuff in sprints, and changes are good until the last minute. It says so here in the manifesto, like it's Moses coming down from a mountain with stone tablets. And the reality is, there's a CFO, there's a financial part of an organization. People are responsible for how funds are allocated, and that funding model can be hard to adapt to the idea of, well, hey, if everything can change and that's a feature, not a bug, how do we wrap some sort of financial controls around that? How do we adapt our existing financial controls around that? Because, this idea of we'll just change anything and that's okay because what the customer needs and value is all that matters. That's an oversimplification for most modern organizations. And that's where I think Agile gets into a lot of trouble is, if you're a Scrum Master and Agile project manager and you're like, well, everything can change and you have to get okay with that because it's Agile ways of working, that's not going to fly. So how do we balance those real world needs, especially in larger enterprises? If you're in a small team and you've got 5 people and it's a startup, yeah, those rules don't exist a whole lot. But most of the places that I've worked, and I think most of the places most of you have worked, Agile, Waterfall, or somewhere in between, there's a lot of other parts of the organization. There's accountability. If you're in financial services like I am, there's also compliance and stuff. So there's some rules that you don't get to break just because you're Agile. And that's what we're trying to talk about here is how do we blend those together in a real world way? And for those of you who are approaching that journey, like the impetus for this was John Thompson and Greg saying, hey, we're starting this journey or we're in that journey. How do we do this? So that's kind of where we're at. So this isn't going to solve all the problems. There's some other techniques at the enterprise level that if there's interest, we can talk about in a subsequent session, like budgeting by horizon and some of those things, and fixed funding by value stream. But today we're really just talking about meeting people where they are and some simple ways to address these needs that you can do today or in the next couple of days or couple of weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Oh, that's not the button I wanted to hit. Let's try that again. Okay.
These are the droids you're looking for.
Exactly. So the key challenges we were facing, right? And again, I think this is kind of just universal to projects, right? Aligning budgets with evolving scope, right? That's true, I think, everywhere you're facing. And again, that was, and coming from a new perspective, right, and talking with John, is that was kind of part of what I was hoping to solve, right, is that and really recognizing that's going to be true no matter what the project is, right? Your job as project manager is making sure those things are balanced. Again, what I can see here is, again, or at least what I kind of talked about with John is from my outside perspective of having not done it, right, is that at least if you start the conversation with the lens of, approaching in a more agile, flexible thing, it gives that beginning of transparency earlier on for your customer, for your corporation, as opposed to, having to, again, kind of just drive that from a different angle and again, either way can facilitate it. It's just that. Right. And then I think the one thing we're really going to be talking is that bottom left corner today. I think that's what our sheet kind of helps, is that difficulty in estimating costs for iterative development. I think this gives kind of just a simple way to kind of tackle that one piece pretty well. And then again, when there's, and it helps you track and monitor how it's behaving as you move along through the project. Reconciling FISP milestones and hybrid projects. Again, I talked about this with John a little bit earlier. And, when you're putting those milestones in around the iterative thing, right? When you drive that and when you have a problem, again, as a project manager, you're trying to raise that red flag as early as you can, right? So there's a reconciliation that really happens if you've missed bringing it up, right? It's just going to cause a pain point, and that's true everywhere. And then, again, and all that's kind of driven by maintaining that stakeholder transparency, right? While you're adjusting these forecasts and those things, however you've set up your communication for that is really critical. But I really liked researching this because it just kind of said, oh, I'm experiencing these problems now, but I'm not the only one.
Let me pause for a minute, just for we've got a good audience here. Thank you. I mean, good in terms of both quality and quantity. So thank you. I pander to every audience. If you haven't joined a meeting with me, I am unapologetic about how much I pander. That said, any other challenges than the ones that you see here that you have run into in your world, right? I mean, this is one of the gnarliest obstacles to moving in towards agile ways of working. So not doing agile, but being agile is what we still have funding that is aligned very explicitly to a very specific list of things that have to be done. Then any other challenges that any of you have run into to add to this, where you've run into trying to figure out how to establish or forecasting person hours? John, we're modern. We say person hours, at least I do. Person hours for software development. That one, I have a very strong visceral reaction. We know some people who can work 8 hours a day and get nothing done, and we know people who can work 5 minutes and get a lot done. So person hours is not my favorite metric to use. If you have to use it, we can talk about some techniques. But that is a good question. If that is required by your organization and you can't talk them out of person hours, I think that may be a subsequent session. As Greg and I were going through this yesterday, part of what I realized is that we likely need to have another follow-up related to estimation, because a lot of this presupposes some approaches to estimation that you may or may not do today, in whatever estimation technique you use. So that said, so establishing person hours and being able to track that, I think, John, there's a way for us to extrapolate with what Greg will show us, that you could establish person hours, just sort of personal preference. Hours are an awful metric of progress for the vast majority of things, unless they're completely repetitive and predictable. Software development often doesn't work that way. But other projects, my background is software and product. Other projects may well lean to that infrastructure or other sorts of things that are predictable. So let's talk through that if we've got some time, John, but we can at least tell you how to extrapolate it from the spreadsheet in a way that I think would work. So anything else that's not on this list in terms of some of those challenges, hybrid or moving from a waterfallish type approach? Debbie, please.
I think I've seen a little bit of where we're going from functional organization to cross-functional organization, and then how do we make sure that we have budget associated with more the work versus the function.
Perfect. Yeah. And I would, Debbie, if you don't mind, if I can put you on the spot, when we get to the spreadsheet, it's very simple, but I think it addresses that, at least from my perspective. I'd love your thoughts and others. And I feel like I'm obligated very quickly to say, so Debbie, as I recall, we were co-leaders of the Seattle Scaled Agile Framework meetup group a decade ago, something like that. And by the way, Debbie was far more effective in that than I, but I was part of that team. But a lot of experience from Boeing and the good work. Boeing is one of the flagship groups that implemented Scaled Agile, and I hope I don't embarrass you by saying it was your work and your team's work that made that happen at a very large organization. So there's a lot of experience there. But I think on that note, let's talk about the way that we're approaching this, because I do think it addresses the cross-functionality issue. So we're not saying, like, we're rolling up to a Burger King drive-thru and saying, I need 5 burgers, 3 shakes. Like, we're saying this is what it takes in the aggregate, and this is the composite funding that is required. So very good. Thank you.
Speaking of which, yeah, so I think we're going to hop away from the slideshow for just a second, because we'll kind of talk to each of these items in the first approach here. As we
you may want to make your Excel a little bit bigger.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of us, myself included, we're kind of at a point where we really need.
How's
that?
I
could just put you on a much larger monitor, but I'll be looking. Okay.
That's very good. Thank you.
Okay, that's visible. Great.
Fred and I are the old folks club here, so we need everything.
Again, we kind of this. Yeah, if I could put a magnifying glass on your camera, my screen, I would.
Okay, I think you may be freezing. The
How do I
timing is
set
off.
this up for kind of. Oh, okay. Well, that's not fun. Let me see if there's anything I can do on my side to
Okay,
help with
you're
that.
you're good now. Let's just keep going.
Okay.
Or maybe not.
Perfect.
You might have to get
Um,
closer. It seemed to work better when you were closer. I don't know why.
Kind of iterative agile budgeting segment, which really gets right. Down here we have a table, right, where we can identify our team members. Right here we have the 5 members of NSYNC who are going to be doing some coding for us at a rate of $50 an hour. Right, and then how the, again, just if you're using this template, right, you can change the quantity of your thing, or again the how quickly your sprints are happening, the months or days, and it'll start calculating information for you in terms of your sprint rate, which it'll give you an estimated cost up top, right? So you can utilize this to give you that first kind of base estimate as you're building that. And then down here, and again, I built these as tables, so if you add a different thing, so again, if John is going to join NSYNC, right, we can put him in here, right, and it just automatically includes it in our estimated sprint costs. Nope,
Steve's got a question. Go ahead, Steve.
Just a quick question. I'm curious. For a sprint duration, you have quantity, but for the units, is the minimum unit a day, or does it actually go down to hours?
I didn't put in hours.
Don't put in hours. Like, yeah, this is what we're trying to get away from, the hourly for that duration, and yeah, I think that hours for agile ways of working, the whole idea of
I would imagine
what is
so.
I'm sorry.
I would imagine that. I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, no, good question though, and I think even if you're doing Kanban, by the way, you can still look at, if you don't do iterations, there's still ways to use the same approach to have that context of time. I just normally don't find. The more granular we get, the more that we sort of move away from this. The idea isn't precision; it's sort of rough ideas. And the reality that anyone who's ever owned a P&L is there's never that level of precision when you're dealing with people, right? Some people are sick, you hire people, they're not always productive. Go ahead, John.
I had just a simple question. It's something I've been working on the project I'm on now, is trying to go from a very, I guess, raw assessment. But since a lot of the software we develop at IDT are version upgrades, is to go back, and I've asked them, why not go back to the last version and look at what that version costs us, and then use it as maybe a sanity check when they start to create their high-level forecast going into the new project, because our current process, they weren't using actuals from a previously closed out project.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And one of the things, if I would have thought about this earlier, this is on me, and I know I'm being recorded, and that's okay. We would have probably done an estimation session on this first, and this followed it, because this presupposes knowing an estimate with the team based on the body of work that you're looking at, how many sprints we think that might take. And for those of us who've been in agile ways of working for a while, we know that empiricism is a thing, right? Scrum or Kanban, don't care what framework you use, but the best way to see how long something takes in the future, it's not going to be 100%, but the most reliable way is looking at stuff that's about that same body of work that you've done before. There's variables, but it is a very good way to get, we used to say horseshoes and hand grenades. You want to be close. I don't know if anyone uses that metaphor, but we want to be close. We're not trying to be exact. So John, exactly. And that comes down to an upgrade, if it's like for like, but even if it's not like for like, if it's apples and oranges, exactly. And Debbie threw something in the chat. And this is one of the things when we look about estimating stuff, when you're talking with the team, and I would welcome, Debbie, feel free to jump in as well if you'd like. But I couldn't overstate what Debbie said more. That's a starting point. So when I look at something, did we do this before? Is that upgrade about the same type of work? Not all upgrades are equal, right? So but it's a good starting point. So what's different about that upgrade? That upgrade took us 4 sprints. Okay, is it the same team? To Debbie's point, well, no, we just had three new contractors join the team. They just joined. It's a new code base. We just implemented this. So that's where you start saying, how do those changes, and they're not all negative, right? It may be that this team did that work before in 4 sprints, but they're more cohesive now. And this is a minor upgrade rather than a major one, in which case the team might estimate it to be less, but it still is a way to get a reasonable, empirically based, but then customized, refined based on current status, that sort of combo of empiricism, but then some level of projection about the things that are different from that thing you're comparing it to. Debbie, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, you hit spot on about that. You've got to actually look at the work and the people and take into that consideration when you're trying to put a new estimates together.
Yeah, thank you. And again, the teams at Boeing did this at a scale that is just remarkable. But those principles apply regardless of the size of your team. Is what is different, and then ask, for those of us as PMs, I would say, don't make the number for them. Ask the team, what's the multiplier on this, right? And then you can have a mathematically based way to say, they're both upgrades, but we have new people on the team. This one's more complex than the last one. We have some tech debt that's going to be gnarly based on this. And therefore it's going to be a 20% multiplier on top. Go ahead, Steve.
I just wanted to add, the more you leave it to them to make their estimates and give you the numbers and the decisions, the more you keep their ownership going for themselves.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. We as PMs, especially if you're moving over from waterfall ways of working, there's a command and control kind of flavor to it. And all of us have had some of that, or at least seen it. And that's something that we have to move away from and then move into that facilitation. John, go ahead.
One last question. In the way we're currently running our software development projects, they break the estimates down to a very high level of financial, where they book out for a year and they say, we're going to do like 30 projects. And then they go to the project level, but it's how they categorize it and then run it into a project. But even at the highest level, would you use the same thing? Try to go back and say, can you figure out financially, okay, this is what we spent last year. Now, when we start with this big bucket of money they're going to create and say, we're going to do 30 projects based on this amount of money, would you still try to figure out some way to come up with historicals to say, is it like basically a sanity check before they say, we're going to commit to this bucket of money and then divvy it up amongst the 30 projects?
Let me throw a quick idea or two out there, and then and see Carl threw something in the chat. I'll read that as well. Feel free to jump in as well. Very quickly, what I'd say, for me, precision, when you're talking about a portfolio of projects, there's a couple different ways to handle it. There's a more modern way that many organizations, especially if you're looking at scaled Agile, which is, again, I know what was implemented within Boeing, but similar constructs is funding by value streams. I sort of alluded to that earlier. We can talk more about that in a subsequent session. There is a way to provide funding where you're basically saying, you as a team or you as a product in a product-based model, you have X number of $1 million this year for your portfolio for CapEx type projects. How you spend that should be based on priority, and that's a whole different session. But most organizations aren't ready to do that yet. They're not ready for fixed funding based on an organization. They want to fund projects or initiatives or products at a certain amount. That being the case, John, what at least I've done, and I would recommend, especially if you're moving towards this, I never want to confuse what happens right now versus what might happen 3 months from now or 3 years from now. There's a maturity thing. But the more that you can do it at the granular level, so team members do estimates, you derive some costs for an initiative based on the model that Greg is showing here. In the aggregate, you combine those together. If you start top down and you just say, well, we spent 10 million last year on projects for this part of this division, and so it should be in line with that. There's some inherent danger top down for me, unless the company just says, we're fixed and you only have 10 million to work with. And within that, you have to figure out how to fund individual projects. But that's not a scenario that I think makes sense going into in this context. I would say start at the bottom up at this project level and then look at it in the aggregate. Now, if you're doing similar work year over year, and most organizations do, you can compare the P&L and get granular on the prior year's projects. How many did we do? What's the median cost per project? Those sorts of things. But I wouldn't over-engineer it. Just the composite aggregated data is your friend, and you'll have some data points within the aggregated data that you can sort of slice and dice it if you want to see some trending. We did X number of projects for between, Y and Z dollars. Hopefully that's enough. I feel like I should probably truncate myself, although it's okay. Carl. Oh, go ahead, John.
John, just really quickly.
Yeah.
Our initial project, when I started this Six Sigma project, we identified everything, to your point, was top down. So the solution base now is, to your point, bottom up. They have a very aggressive, how much they want to improve by at the end of a project. But we're all definitely, to your point, we're pushing to say, talk to the actual developers, even at the estimating level, to say, what do you think? At a very rough point, but it's bottom up. We're not saying only the executives are saying, you're going to do it this way. No, we are definitely more of a bottom up, because they have a tight requirement at the end of the project to not be off between budget to actual. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole nother rabbit hole that we can talk about at some point. But the whole budget to actuals basically perpetuates bad behavior, because you're trying to hit the wrong target from my perspective, right? We're trying to get precise in predicting the future. And if we're good at that, then we should work the stock market, not projects. So that said, Greg, if you want to go back, Carl, though, did I capture your comments in the chat? I wanted to follow up.
Yeah, I was just kind of sharing, hey, something that had helped me, going back to what Debbie had said about having that same team. We actually started creating a list, because we had one major project that was always constantly being improved. Now, this is going into healthcare. It's a telehealth system. So any iterations on that, we would start to mark down, because another service line could ask for the same thing, and we could actually I could give them estimates on a meeting without going to the developers, because we had already kind of hashed this stuff out, had a dedicated list. And as our processes improved, if we made something that was more component driven, maybe that 1 hour LOE goes down to a half hour LOE. It wasn't all encompassing, but we tried to call out what is the most common thing, from as granular as a new field needs to be created, all the way up to we need a major new service being developed as an MVP model. And we knew, okay, at bare basic, it's going to take X amount of time to deliver what you guys are typically asking for. And that helped a lot with our budgeting when I was talking to C-suite.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and that's great. And I lived, perhaps uncomfortably, but I've lived at the C-suite level for a while as well. And it's difficult to provide those answers, but also to not paint yourself into a corner. So what you said, and that idea of empiricism, I think is extraordinarily valuable. The more that we can say, just like with story pointing, right? This thing is kind of like that thing. That really helps. Even if you're off, you're not going to be off by an order of magnitude in most cases. And traditional project estimation, you are, because you're basically making a shopping list, and it doesn't work that way. That's why I don't like person hours, by the way, is that they're a fallacy. So thanks, Carl, for that. Thanks, John. Thanks for the clarification, and we can talk more about that in subsequent sessions if there's interest with the group, and if not, JT, you and I can talk some more. Greg, in the interest of time, do we want to go back to your handy dandy notebook, as we say in Blue's Clues?
Indeed, yeah. We're not even going to get a letter yet. Thank you all. I really appreciate all those feedback. Again, hearing from your experience really helps me synthesize ideas that I haven't done yet. Going back to this, so again, we had left kind of setting up that we're able to add team members as we need to give ourselves a base estimate, right? Or fixed costs, right? If we know there's going to be certain costs that are going to be consistent every time, we can add those into this item and get an estimated sprint cost. From there, as John and I talked about it, right, we can then start doing a plan versus actual. And again, if we had multiple different sprints by different teams.
Could you enlarge that so everyone can see that you have,
please. Thank you.
that you have good taste in music except for your first line, which should be deleted as a row
Yes.
with prejudice, as they say in the legal system.
Yeah,
Thank
well, when you have children, you listen to the Trolls movies way too often, so you get it stuck in your head.
Brad, we can agree to disagree. We like MF too. Anyway, hey, Greg, before you do that, could you go back to the last tab, because there's something that I noticed, and forgive me for forgive me for not noticing this. For those of you who have not had to manage a P&L, if you don't know what fully loaded hourly rate means, when you add stuff, if you really want to price it properly, talk to your HR folks and figure out what the full benefit load. It's usually a percentage. When I've done this, you can just add a row to calculate, but it's usually somewhere between 25 to 50% of a salaried person's compensation that the org pays is the benefit load. So if you really want to know what stuff costs, $50 is an hourly rate. If you've got a 50% benefit load, is going to actually be 75. So factor it in one way or the other. You can factor it in this column, or just add a column to do the calculation. It's grade school math, but it matters it matters between 25 to 50%.
And as I was reading, some companies prefer you to just go with like a blended hourly rate, right? Because they have variation of salary among teams, and rather than doing granular, HR gives you a figure that you use for the team.
And
right?
that's actually complementary to what I was just saying. So what I'm saying is every employee, everybody who is paid by the company, who's not a 1099, not a contractor, if you want to do this and have the math right, you have to figure out what your company's benefit load is. And that's a percentage. What Greg is talking about, complementary to that, is very important, which is, and this speaks to what Debbie was saying as well, as far as cross-functional teams. So we want a blended rate. So the blended rate, if I've got some people who are $20 an hour, I don't want to do math real time, I'm being recorded. Anyway, just imagine we had different numbers, but the composite across the team, I have a policy against doing even grade school math when I'm being recorded in front of people I don't know and want to impress. But we want a composite rate. And so some people may be $100 an hour. Some people may be 50. But figure out what that blend is and use the blended rate rather than necessarily doing it. So you could say X number of team members, and you wouldn't have to do it by person here. So you can do that either way, but you want to factor those in, because again, there's multipliers on top of all of this. So if you don't get the base part right, your numbers are going to be way off. David, why are you with us? Sorry, do you have the weirdest profile picture? Go ahead.
Yes, I do. I had the chance to wear a vintage dive helmet, so I did. The important thing, and I've been at the executive level, the C-level as well, no matter what you budget, your plan is going to be different. So don't get wound around the axle going to the penny. It's not worth it. Figure out what management, I'll use that as a broad term, wants to see as far as a loaded rate or a raw rate, and then run with it. And you can't go wrong with 36%.
Except when you can. But other than it's good. All right. Well, I thank you for that, David, and thanks for the question. So these would be things like, seriously, if you go back and use this, our idea was, by 1 o'clock Pacific today, you all would have something you could use, knowledge and a tool. When you use this, like David just mentioned, what I think Fred, Greg, others were saying, and Carl, you use the composite, use what is used in your organization, align on it, and then tell people how you're calculating this in advance, like show them the math. So if you're CFO or whoever, boss, make sure that they're aligned on your approach and the calculations, and then you can use this same template. Tweak the template when Greg gives it to you so that it works for you in your org. But yeah, it's just some of the calculations you may want to do. Okay, Greg, please.
Yeah, and again, it's in Excel, so everything's editable to be exactly what you need. It's tailorable. Okay, so moving back, yeah, so again, if you have a few different sprints you're tracking, you can take those numbers. Again, you can link those from the other tabs if you want to make multiple tabs. But for the instance of this, we're just providing the examples of you developed your planned costs, and then as you collecting your actual costs from whatever information you're getting for that, you can then start tracking variances, or as we have in the dashboard, which I think might be a little bit better perspective, is you can talk to burn rate, right? So the rate at which the team consumes its allocated budget over time, right? So even when we're looking at, sorry to hop between tabs as much, you know, that the Ramones really went over budget here, in a burn rate perspective, right, the team had done their hours more effectively than, say, Bjork.
Could you zoom that in, please, a little bit?
Had you?
Oh, you're frozen in.
Oh, where do we get to? Am I back?
We're here. Steve was asking if you could zoom in a little bit.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminders.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Here, and let's wrap that text so we can see that better. Is that visible a little bit better? So, right, so again, we're taking that actual cost we collected from the previous tab, and that's being formatted into here. And then we're just trying to pull data for how much time we actually used, and that gives us our burn rate. And then additionally, I kind of put some things of, you know, this can tabulate your total spend if this is all one project versus tracking your budget. If you're saying that certain items are complete, if they've got the actual cost in here, then you could even say how, you know, repeat. And again, this one's kind of dashboards there for you to show your executive or management team. And then you can, you know, tack to the right and start putting in the information you need to drive, you know, information so you can kind of show where you're at. And again, the back end kind of has some of the drop down information and some of the calculations for hours and things, so you can tweak it as needed for your team for your use on this. And then we are kind of covered that. If anybody have any questions regarding the Excel sheet, again, if you have questions or have anything, you can always reach out to me or ping on the chapter LinkedIn channel. And we can answer questions. And so we've covered, right? And again, we were trying to cover burn rate and a couple of those other items here in this Excel sheet. If you have Power BI or other similar tools, certainly utilize those things that can do some of the data crunching for you better than Excel. And then again, once you have that information, you can use those, you know, and adjust activities at sprint reviews, right? All that's to then give you the tools to start working with your team to get things corrected if you need to make corrective actions or, you know, continue on or communicate to your customer or your executive team on what you need. So that's why, you know, it's simple enough information to provide, you know, actionable tools, right? The goal is actionable. We didn't make anything specifically for hybrid, but that Excel sheet, again, is tailorable to address the elements of waterfall that you put in your system, right? You can calculate out your waterfall milestones, you know, those elements. You know, we have example here, you know, if you know your compliance, you know, milestone is going to take 200 hours to get done, you know, and price that out, you can add that feature in and you can still budget the same way. Again, aligning the budgets, you know, and again, using the tools to get these fixed milestones and everything kind of planned out, you know, that's just kind of building out the tools as, you know, a project manager for those things, and then kind of consolidating things and going between things with Excel.
And what Greg and I had talked about, so please don't see this this list as prescriptive. What's I'd mentioned earlier, and what Greg and I wanted to do with all of you today in a very short period of time was to say, if you want prescriptive rules, and guidance to just get started right now from nothing. If you're not doing this today, here's some stuff you can do. But most of you are somewhere on your journey. Most of you are not at the first step. So use the tools. I would suggest use the tools that you have to the extent that they support this project. They're adding more and more Agile capabilities. Jira is like, the old commercial of your chocolate got in my peanut butter, your peanut butter got in my chocolate, for those of you. Some of you are old as me, or at least you've seen the commercial for Reese's peanut butter cups. But both of them are trying to address what are in the other products. My main thing with tooling, as somebody who does this coaching for a living and consulting, is at least start with the tools that you're comfortable with. Don't let tools be a barrier to moving forward. Start with where you are, the Kanban principle, right? Start with where you are with what you have. So if you're comfortable in Excel, don't stay there forever, but don't wait until you have a license for Jira if that's stopping you. If you don't have project, you don't know how to use it, use the tools that you've got, but apply these principles, starting with that workbook. But if you're using another tool, Asana or Monday or, God forbid, Microsoft Planner, and I know I'm being recorded, whatever tools you have, start with what you've got, but apply the principles in that tool, and then evolve to another tool when people see the benefits of working this way.
Real quick, just because we're getting towards the end of the session, I just dropped in the PDU claim code into the chat. Everyone feel free to grab that and copy it real quick. I just want to make sure we get that before the end. I think, again, after going through this, tailoring these things between hybrid and iterative, I think, again, if you've been in a waterfall environment, you know how to price things out, you know how to budget. If you've been, and this gives kind of those, what that agile iterative costing element looks like, a way to calculate it. And so, again, you can price that out and kind of run the same things. As we were just talking about with tools, we talked with John a lot of, kind of about which ones would be the best for which options, right? So Jira and those types of things will track time and costs, monitor velocity and task. I think these slides reasonably speak for themselves, right? MS Project and things to manage fixed scope milestones, drive deliverables. Sorry to be reading the slide on this one, but again, you're going to use Excel sheets for recording planned and actual costs, doing scenario-based cost calculations. Power BI is going to give you some dashboards, right, and give you some of your KPIs or OKRs, whichever your company's using for that. Again, and then, again, just to talk about best practices, and I think even regardless of what framework, right, these are the things that, is you're trying to keep things simple and transparent, right, no matter how you approach it. You want to review and adjust forecasts, and look at those things, right? I think, again, that's the nice thing about the iterative part of Agile is it does drive that reviewing, again, it's built into the other to waterfall as well, but again, it just kind of, sometimes you're waiting till things close and you take a review because you haven't driven it the same way. Scenario planning, right? Any uncertainty, right, is always good. Risk management is always key for any project, trying to think about where you can hit pitfalls, and maintaining alignment, right? Everything's got to work in your system for what the work is, and as we talked about, like a lot of what you guys have described in my manufacturing of a physical thing, right? I'm going to have bigger sunk costs, as John and I were talking about it often say, he's working in 0 and 1s. Right, and the sunk cost I have when I have 100 boards where something goes wrong is bigger. So I have to have different considerations and align a little differently to how things are driven in my business. Common pitfalls to avoid. We don't want to ignore when scope changes or impacts of any of these things. Again, hitting a point where you're talking to things earlier rather than not. Underestimating costs as across the board, always a problem, right? Because that's where you have to have those hard discussions about whether you're changing scope or changing budget. Right, if you don't update your forecasts, right, you're gonna fail to see what's happening, and you could be slipping or sliding, and you're just driving along, without a compass on that end. As opposed, and then, again, if you're trying to build tools that you're not comfortable with and you're overcomplicating your system as opposed to something you understand and can drive, right? You don't want to build something you're not in control over on that end. So hey, look at that. We got 4 minutes for a little bit more Q&A. I appreciate you guys coming up with questions as you needed them. And it was really fun to hear this discussion today. So thank you all. And thank you, John, for all your insight in getting this done. And thank you, John Thompson, for sparking this for us.
No problem. One quick question, I know we got so little time, is using the concept of earned value management to put an actual metric to how a project is running in a completely agile software development, if that even makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know if in 2 minutes we could cover that.
I figured as much.
But I mean, but maybe that's our next conversation if there's enough interest from folks. Unfortunately, I'm going to give you kind of my perspective on things and probably get myself in trouble. Thankfully,
I say don't use it. Oh,
yeah, but it's hard to take you seriously. You're in like a 1910
vintage
diving suit in your profile picture. Like nobody's.
It doesn't
might
matter.
as well dress up like a rabbit.
But back to EVM and Agile, I think those are just two antithetical things. And
what I was going to say. And Dave's direct response probably better than mine. The idea of value in Agile and the way that traditional project management treats value, you might as well be using different words. So we can talk about that, but there's a whole different session about what does value mean in modern ways of working. And it's not the iron triangle. It is actually, did the people who ultimately pay our bills, who are our customers, did they get value from their perspective in what we delivered? Doesn't matter about scope, budget, cost. At the end of the day, did it move the needle? That's what it's about. So with that, it's a whole different meaning of
that's my world.
Yeah. So that's the modern interpretation of what value means. It's yeah. Anyway. Thank you all so much for joining. It's nice to see everybody here.
And I want to do a special shout out, Greg. Excellent work on this. And John, you guys are great. And I put it in the chat too. You did a fabulous job. And the tools, I know, I already downloaded them. So I know I'm going to use them.
That was all, Greg, but thank you. Thanks, everybody. Debbie, so nice to see you again. We'll have to catch up. Everybody else, take care. We'll see you
soon. Next month.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
David, nice to see you too.
Oh, thanks. Always a pleasure.